The kitchen smelled like a Sunday. It was a rich, heavy aroma of smoked turkey necks simmering in a massive pot of collard greens, the sharp tang of mustard in the potato salad, and the sweet, buttery air rising from the peach cobbler resting on the counter. For 40 years, this had been Evelyn's domain. It was the heart of the house she and her late husband, Thomas, had worked 2 jobs each to pay off. But today, the heat of the oven wasn't comforting. It felt suffocating. Evelyn gripped the edge of the granite countertop, her knuckles turning a pale, dusty gray against her deep brown skin. A sharp electric pain shot up from her right hip, radiating down to her knee. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a slow breath through her teeth. Just a little longer, she told herself, a mantra she had repeated since she was a 20-something nurse working double shifts at County General. You rest when the work is done, not when you're tired. That was the unwritten rule, wasn't it? The expectation placed squarely on her shoulders. She was the matriarch, the strong black woman, the pillar that never cracked, never swayed, and certainly never complained. Outside, she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Chloe and Marcus had arrived. Evelyn pushed herself upright, ignoring the searing throb in her joint, and grabbed a kitchen towel to wipe the sweat from her forehead. She smoothed down her apron. The front door opened, and immediately, the quiet sanctuary of Evelyn's home was shattered by the frantic energy her daughter always brought with her. "Nia, do not touch the walls with those hands. I swear you attract dirt." Chloe's voice preceded her. Chloe breezed into the kitchen a moment later, looking like she had just stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. She wore a flawless beige cashmere sweater that Evelyn knew cost more than a week's groceries, her hair styled in immaculate silk presses. Marcus followed close behind, checking his smartwatch, dressed in tailored chinos and a crisp button-down. They looked like the picture of upward mobility. "Hey, Mama," Chloe said, offering a distracted kiss on Evelyn's cheek. She immediately lifted the lid off the Dutch oven. "Smells good. Is it almost ready? Marcus has a networking call at 6, so we really can't stay late." "It's resting, Chloe," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "Where's my baby?" A 10-year-old girl with bright eyes and a mess of intricate braids barreled into the kitchen, wrapping her arms tightly around Evelyn's waist. "Grandma, I missed you." Evelyn's heart softened instantly. She stroked Nia's hair, the pain in her hip dulling for just a fraction of a second. "I missed you too, sweet girl. Go wash up, dinner's about ready." As Nia skipped out of the room, Chloe leaned against the counter, letting out a long, theatrical sigh. She crossed her arms, looking down at her manicured nails. Here it comes, Evelyn thought. She knew that sigh. She had heard it 100 times before. It was the prelude to the pitch. "Mom, I am just so stressed out I could scream," Chloe began, keeping her voice low so Marcus, who had already retreated to the living room with his phone, wouldn't hear, or at least so he could pretend not to hear. Evelyn turned back to the stove, stirring the gravy slowly. "What is it this time, Chloe?" "It's the credit cards," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine desperation. "The interest rates are burying us. Marcus had that client pull out of the consulting deal last month, and we had to put Nia's private school tuition on the card. Now the bank is threatening to send us to collections. If that happens, Marcus's credit score tanks, he loses his business loan, and we lose everything." Evelyn stopped stirring. She looked at her daughter. Chloe's eyes were wide, brimming with tears. She looked exhausted, overwhelmed, a mother just trying to keep her family afloat. "How much?" Evelyn asked. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. 5,000, Chloe choked out, a tear spilling over her lashes. "Mom, I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. I swear it's just a bridge loan. We'll pay you back as soon as Marcus lands this next contract. Please, I don't know what else to do." Evelyn leaned against the stove. $5,000. It was a massive chunk of the emergency savings she had carefully guarded since Thomas passed away. It was the money meant for a rainy day, for peace of mind in her twilight years. But looking at Chloe, Evelyn felt the familiar heavy blanket of guilt settle over her. How could she sit on a nest egg while her daughter drowned? What kind of mother did that? "All right," Evelyn said softly. The fight drained out of her. "All right, let me go get my checkbook." Chloe lunged forward, hugging Evelyn tightly. "Oh, thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. You're saving our lives, really." Evelyn slowly made her way to the small desk in the hallway, every step a battle against the agonizing pain in her right side. She wrote the check with a steady hand, her neat, practiced cursive filling out the amount. 5,000. She handed it to Chloe, who quickly folded it and slipped it into her sleek leather designer handbag. "Dinner," Evelyn managed to say, pointing back toward the kitchen. "Let's eat." Evelyn walked back to the stove to lift the heavy cast-iron skillet of cornbread. She gripped the handle, planting her feet. But as she pivoted, the joint in her right hip simply gave way. It didn't just hurt. It failed entirely. A loud, sickening pop echoed in the kitchen. Evelyn gasped, the air leaving her lungs in a rush. The world tilted violently. The heavy iron skillet slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor and sending golden pieces of cornbread scattering across the tile. Evelyn hit the ground hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the fall, but the pain in her hip was an inferno. It was blinding, white-hot agony that made her vision swim with dark spots. She let out a guttural cry, clutching her leg. Marcus rushed into the kitchen, freezing at the sight. Nia screamed from the hallway. Chloe stood frozen for a second, then quickly stepped back so the crumbled cornbread wouldn't get on her suede boots. She looked down at her mother, who was writhing on the floor, gasping for air. "Mom, seriously?" Chloe's voice wasn't laced with panic. It was laced with profound annoyance. "What did you do?" "My hip," Evelyn wheezed, tears of sheer pain blurring her vision. Call 911. Something broke." Marcus finally sprang into action, pulling out his phone and dialing. Nia ran to Evelyn, dropping to her knees and crying, "Grandma, are you okay? Grandma." "I'm okay, baby," Evelyn lied through her teeth, her hand trembling as she stroked Nia's arm. "Don't cry." Chloe ran a hand through her hair, looking at the stove, then at the mess on the floor, and finally down at Evelyn. The irritation on her face was unmistakable. She looked at her watch. "I can't believe this is happening right now," Chloe muttered, pacing a tight circle. "Marcus, what did they say? How long?" 10 minutes, Marcus said, his voice tense. Evelyn lay there, the cold tile pressing against her cheek. She was in agony, vulnerable, terrified. She needed her daughter to kneel beside her, to hold her hand, to tell her it would be all right. But Chloe remained standing, her arms crossed tight across her chest. "Listen, Mom," Chloe said, her tone suddenly taking on a sharp, clipped businesslike edge. "I hope the hospital can just pop it back in or whatever, but if you can't watch Nia and cook the meals next week, you need to figure it out yourself. You have to let us know. Marcus has that summit, and I have a product launch. I don't have time to deal with a medical crisis right now, okay? Just don't bother coming back until you can actually help out." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Don't bother coming back until you can actually help out." Evelyn stared up at Chloe. The physical pain in her hip was momentarily eclipsed by a cold, hollow shock in her chest. For a second, she thought she had misheard. But Chloe's face was set in a rigid mask of inconvenience. There was no empathy, no fear for her mother's life, only anger that her free childcare and personal chef had malfunctioned. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. "I'll go wave them down," Marcus said, hurriedly leaving the kitchen, clearly eager to escape the heavy atmosphere. Chloe sighed again, grabbing her designer handbag off the counter. She rummaged through it, muttering about her car keys. In her haste, the bag tipped. A few items spilled out onto the counter, and a sleek, thick paper envelope fluttered off the edge, landing softly on the tile floor, just inches from Evelyn's face. Chloe didn't notice. She found her keys, grabbed Nia by the hand, and pulled the crying girl away. "Come on, Nia. We need to move the car so the ambulance can get in." Evelyn was left alone on the floor. The pain was still a roaring fire, but the stillness of the kitchen gave her a moment of clarity. She turned her head slightly, her cheek resting on the cool tile. The envelope lay right in front of her eyes. It wasn't sealed. It was an elegant, heavy-stock folder, the kind used for high-end purchases. The flap was open, revealing the crisp documents inside. Evelyn blinked, trying to clear her blurred vision. The top document was a receipt. She squinted. The bold, black lettering at the top read, "Tesla Motors, Deposit Confirmation." Evelyn's breath hitched. Beneath it, slightly askew, was a glossy brochure. "Welcome to Oak Creek Country Club. Elite Membership Activation." Right there, neatly printed at the bottom of the Tesla receipt, was the deposit amount. Amount paid, $3,000. The country club activation fee noted on the brochure slip peeking out, Initiation, $2,000. Total, $5,000. Evelyn lay on the floor, the sirens now blaring right outside her window, flashing red lights cutting through the fading Sunday afternoon sun. The air in her lungs felt heavy, turning into shards of glass with every breath. They weren't drowning in debt. They weren't facing collections. The tears Chloe had cried just 20 minutes ago were a performance. A calculated, flawless performance designed to bleed her dry so they could maintain an illusion of wealth. She had just handed over her hard-earned security, money she had saved by wearing 5-year-old coats and turning down the heat in the winter so her daughter could drive a luxury car and sip martinis at a country club. And then, when her body had finally buckled under the weight of serving them, she was told she was an inconvenience. Don't bother coming back. Heavy boots sounded in the hallway. The paramedics rushed in, their voices loud and urgent. They knelt beside her, asking questions, checking her vitals, preparing the stretcher. "Ma'am, can you hear me? We're going to get you something for the pain," one of the medics said kindly, his hand on her shoulder. Evelyn didn't answer him right away. Her eyes were fixed on the envelope on the floor. With a trembling hand, she reached out, her fingers closing tightly around the thick paper. She crumpled it into her palm, hiding it against her chest. "Yes," Evelyn whispered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the agony tearing through her lower half. "I hear you. I'm ready to go." As they lifted her onto the stretcher, the physical pain was agonizing. But the woman who was being carried out of that house was not the same woman who had been cooking dinner an hour ago. The matriarch who sacrificed everything was dead on that kitchen floor. The woman on the stretcher was wide awake, and the cold, quiet fire of absolute clarity had just been lit in her soul. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only company Evelyn had for 3 days. The room smelled of bleach, stale lemon jello, and the sharp, metallic tang of her own vulnerability. Her right leg felt like it was encased in a block of concrete lined with crushed glass. The surgeon had called the hip replacement a routine success, but at 68 there was nothing routine about waking up with metal drilled into your bones. Yet the physical agony was secondary. It was a dull hum compared to the deafening silence of the hospital room. It was Tuesday afternoon. Visiting hours were in full swing. Down the hall, Evelyn could hear the low murmur of families, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes, the occasional bright laughter of a grandchild bringing a helium balloon. In room 314, there was only the sound of Evelyn's shallow breathing. On the plastic tray table, positioned right next to her untouched plastic cup of apple juice, sat a piece of crumpled, heavy-stock paper. Evelyn had guarded it fiercely. Before the nurses had stripped her of her clothes to put on the drafty hospital gown, she had shoved the Tesla deposit receipt and the Oak Creek Country Club brochure deep into the pocket of her purse. When she woke up from the anesthesia, groggy and disoriented, her first panicked thought hadn't been about her leg. It had been about finding that piece of paper. She reached out now, her fingers dry and slightly swollen, and traced the bold black ink. $3,000. $2,000. She closed her eyes, letting her head sink into the stiff hospital pillow. For decades, Evelyn had worn the badge of the strong black woman, with a mix of pride and silent exhaustion. It was a title inherited from her own mother, a woman who scrubbed floors for white folks during the day and baked pies for the church bake sale at night, never once admitting her back ached. Evelyn had done the same. She had worked night shifts at the hospital so she could attend Chloe's spelling bees during the day. When her husband Thomas passed away suddenly from a heart attack 15 years ago, Evelyn hadn't allowed herself to break down. She had simply tightened her belt, paid off his medical debts, and made sure Chloe never felt the financial void. She had been the safety net, the shock absorber. But looking at the receipt, a sickening realization washed over her. She wasn't a safety net anymore. She was a bank account with a pulse. A young, bright-eyed nurse named Sarah breezed into the room to check her vitals. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around Evelyn's arm, offering a sympathetic smile. "Still quiet in here, Ms. Evelyn," Sarah noted softly, adjusting the IV drip. "Did your daughter say what time she's coming by today? I can make sure she gets a visitor's pass for the parking garage." Evelyn swallowed the lump forming in her throat. The instinct to protect her child, to cover up for Chloe's neglect, flared up immediately. It was a reflex as natural as breathing. "Oh, she's just tied up at work. She's a very important PR executive, you know. She wanted to be here." Evelyn opened her mouth to say the words, to paint the picture of the busy, successful daughter who was just too burdened by her own greatness to visit her recovering mother. But she looked at the receipt on the table. She remembered the annoyance on Chloe's face as she lay screaming on the kitchen floor. "No," Evelyn said. Her voice was raspy, but the timbre was flat and heavy. "She's not coming, Sarah. She's tied up with her new car." Sarah paused, a flicker of professional pity crossing her eyes, but she didn't press. "Well," she said gently, patting Evelyn's hand. "If you need anything, I'm right down the hall. You let me know." When the door clicked shut, the silence returned, heavier this time. Evelyn stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the little perforated dots. She let the memories she had been suppressing bubble to the surface. It wasn't just this $5,000. It was a pattern, an entire tapestry woven with manipulation. There was the $12,000 she had pulled from her retirement fund 4 years ago, when Marcus swore his innovative logistics startup just needed a little seed money to go global. The startup folded in 6 months, and Marcus bought a vintage Rolex the following year to project success to new investors. There was Chloe's extravagant destination wedding in Jamaica. Evelyn had paid for the custom floral arrangements, nearly $10,000 worth of imported orchids. Yet at the reception, Evelyn was seated at a table near the kitchen doors with the elderly aunts, while Chloe's influencer friends and Marcus's frat brothers occupied the front row. Chloe had claimed it was a seating chart glitch. Evelyn had smiled, eaten her dry chicken, and said nothing. Because that's what mothers did. They endured. Her phone vibrated on the mattress beside her hip, jolting her from the past. Evelyn picked it up, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. The screen lit up with a text message. It wasn't from Chloe. It wasn't from Marcus. It was from a burner app number Evelyn had set up on Nia's iPad months ago so the 10-year-old could text her grandma without Marcus monitoring the screen time. "Nia, Grandma, are you okay? My stomach hurts because I miss you. Did the doctors fix your leg?" A single tear, hot and thick, finally broke free and slid down Evelyn's cheek, pooling in her ear. She wiped her face quickly. That little girl was the only pure thing left in that house. Nia didn't care about Tesla deposits or country club memberships. She just wanted the woman who let her lick the peach cobbler batter off the spoon. Evelyn typed back slowly, her thumbs clumsy on the screen. "Evelyn, I'm healing, baby girl. Grandma is strong. You be good for your mama. I love you more than all the stars." The reply came almost instantly. "Nia, I'm not with Mama. She and Dad went on a trip for work to pay for your hospital. I'm with Miss Brenda. She makes me eat boiled cabbage. I want your cornbread." Evelyn's brow furrowed. She stared at the glowing screen. "A trip for work to pay for your hospital." Before Evelyn could process the bizarre text, the heavy wooden door to her room swung open with a definitive swoosh. In walked Loretta. Loretta was a force of nature. At 70 years old, she was Evelyn's next-door neighbor, her oldest friend, and the undisputed gossip queen of their suburban cul-de-sac. Loretta wore a sharp mustard-yellow pantsuit, her silver hair styled in a flawless bob, and she carried an oversized tote bag that looked heavy enough to contain bricks. "Lord have mercy, it smells like bleach and despair in here," Loretta announced, not bothering to lower her voice. She marched straight to the lone visitor's chair, dropped her tote bag with a thud, and leaned over the bed to inspect Evelyn's face. "You look like you've been run over by a tractor, Evie, but your color's not terrible." Evelyn let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "It's good to see you, Retta." Loretta didn't do pity. She did action. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a large foil-wrapped Tupperware container. "Hospital food is designed to keep you weak so you don't fight the bill. I brought you some proper oxtails and rice. You're going to eat it, and you're going to get some life back into those eyes." "I don't have much of an appetite," Evelyn admitted. Loretta stopped unwrapping the foil and narrowed her dark eyes. She looked around the sterile, empty room. She looked at the distinct lack of flowers, the absence of balloons, the empty visitor's chair she had just occupied. "Where is she, Evelyn?" Loretta asked, her tone dropping its usual theatrical flair, becoming dead serious. Evelyn looked away, staring at the blank television screen mounted on the wall. "Chloe is busy, Retta. Nia texted me they had to go on a work trip, to help pay for my hospital bills, supposedly." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Evelyn turned her head back just in time to see Loretta's jaw set into a hard, rigid line. Loretta slowly placed the Tupperware on the tray table, right next to the crumpled receipts. "A work trip," Loretta repeated, the words dripping with a cold, slow venom. That's what Nia said. They left her with a sitter. Loretta let out a sound that was something between a scoff and a growl. She reached into her immaculate leather purse and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen a few times with a manicured nail, her mouth pressed tight. Without a word, she turned the phone around and shoved it toward Evelyn's face. "Look at this," Loretta commanded. Evelyn squinted at the bright screen. It was Chloe's Instagram page. The most recent photo, posted just 4 hours ago, showed Chloe and Marcus clinking crystal champagne flutes. They were sitting in thick, plush white robes on a sun-drenched balcony overlooking rolling, lush vineyards. Chloe was wearing oversized designer sunglasses, her lips painted a perfect, careless red. Beneath the photo was a long, stylized caption, "Taking a desperately needed mental health break in Napa Valley. Life throws you curveballs, and sometimes the stress of carrying the family can absolutely break you. Marcus and I realized we can't pour from an empty cup. Taking this weekend to recharge, manifest abundance, and strategize for the future so we can continue providing for the ones we love. Hashtag self-care, hashtag Napa Valley, hashtag boss moves, hashtag healing journey." Evelyn stared at the screen. The words blurred together. Carrying the family, providing for the ones we love. "I saw them packing the Mercedes yesterday morning while I was watering my hydrangeas," Loretta said, her voice a low, furious rumble. "I walked right over and asked Marcus how you were doing. You know what that smooth-talking fraud told me? He looked me dead in the eye, wearing a $300 linen shirt, and said, 'Ms. Loretta, Evelyn's surgery was so expensive, we had to take an emergency consulting gig on the West Coast just to cover the deductibles. We're hustling for her.'" The heart monitor beside Evelyn's bed began to beep a little faster. "They left that baby with a teenage sitter, lied to the whole neighborhood to make themselves look like martyrs, and flew first class to drink wine in California," Loretta finished, pulling her phone back. "While you were lying here, eating ice chips, recovering from a major surgery that happened while you were cooking their Sunday dinner." Evelyn didn't cry. The single tear she had shed for Nia was the last one left in her reservoir. Instead, a strange sensation began to spread through her chest. It started as a cold knot in her stomach, moving up her spine, chilling the blood in her veins. For 68 years, Evelyn had operated on love, obligation, and the deep-seated fear of being a bad mother. She had let those emotions dictate every check she wrote, every boundary she erased, every disrespect she swallowed. She looked at the crumpled Tesla receipt on the table. She thought of the $5,000 missing from her bank account right now. She thought of the pain radiating from her hip, a physical manifestation of how completely she had broken herself to keep them comfortable. They were drinking champagne. They were posting on the internet about how heavy their burden was. The cold knot in Evelyn's chest suddenly ignited. It didn't burn hot and wild like a rage that makes you scream and throw things. It burned blue and steady. It was the absolute, crystalline clarity of a woman who has finally reached the end of her rope and realizes she doesn't have to hang from it anymore. She can just let go. "Retta," Evelyn said. Her voice was no longer raspy. It was eerily calm, smooth as glass. "I'm listening, Evie," Loretta said, leaning in closer, sensing the monumental shift in the air of the room. Evelyn reached over and picked up the oxtail container. She set it on her lap. Then she picked up the receipts for the luxury car and the country club. She held them out to Loretta. "Do me a favor," Evelyn said, looking her oldest friend dead in the eye. "When you go home tonight, I need you to go into my house. You have the spare key under the ceramic frog on the porch." "I know where the key is. What do you need?" "I need you to go into my home office. Bottom drawer of the mahogany filing cabinet. It's locked, but the key is taped to the underside of the desk drawer," Evelyn instructed, her mind working with a sharp, terrifying precision. "Inside that drawer is a thick blue folder labeled Financials and Estate. I need you to bring it to me tomorrow, first thing in the morning." Loretta looked at the receipts in Evelyn's hand, then up at Evelyn's face. The older woman's eyes widened slightly in understanding. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across Loretta's face. "You calling Vance?" Loretta asked, referring to the sharp-as-a-tack estate lawyer who attended their church. "I'm calling Vance," Evelyn confirmed. She placed her hands flat on the hospital blanket. The pain in her hip was still there, but it didn't control her anymore. It was just a reminder of the price she had paid for a lesson she would never, ever forget. "And Retta?" Yeah, Evie? Bring my reading glasses too, Evelyn said, her gaze fixed on the blank television screen, though she was seeing a completely different picture now. I have a lot of reading to do. I'm done being the strong one for them. It's time they find out what happens when the Foundation decides to get up and walk away. The private medical transport van pulled into Evelyn's driveway 6 days later. It had cost her $400 out of pocket, a sum she paid without blinking from her newly opened independent checking account. Beside her sat Beatrice, a no-nonsense, Jamaican-born private duty nurse Evelyn had hired through an agency. Beatrice didn't ask personal questions. She just efficiently managed Evelyn's pain medication schedule and handled the heavy folding walker with practiced ease. As the van idled, Evelyn peered through the tinted window. Her pristine manicured lawn looked exactly as she had left it, but something was deeply wrong. There were 4 cars parked tightly along the curb, none of which she recognized, save for Marcus's gleaming black Audi SUV blocking the garage. "Expecting company, Ms. Evelyn?" Beatrice asked, her thick accent a comforting rumble as she unbuckled her seatbelt. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "No, Beatrice, I most certainly am not." The journey from the van to the front door was agonizing. Every step with the aluminum walker sent a fresh shockwave of dull, throbbing pain through her right side, but the adrenaline surging through her veins acted as a powerful anesthetic. As they approached the porch, the rhythmic, heavy bass of a smooth jazz track vibrated through the solid oak front door. Evelyn didn't bother reaching for her keys. She simply pushed the door open. The blast of air conditioning carried the scent of expensive catered food, truffle oil, roasted garlic, and something that smelled distinctly like Marcus's overpriced cologne. Evelyn stood in the foyer, her knuckles turning white around the grips of her walker. Her living room, the space she had kept immaculate with weekly polishing and vacuuming, had been completely rearranged. Her antique coffee table had been pushed against the wall to make room for a makeshift bar. About a dozen people, dressed in chic, understated cocktail attire, were mingling, holding Evelyn's good Waterford crystal glasses. And there, holding court by the fireplace, was Chloe. She was wearing a stunning emerald green silk blouse, laughing brightly at something a tall man in a tailored suit had just said. Marcus was behind the bar, generously pouring Evelyn's late husband's prized 20-year-old scotch. They weren't just throwing a party, they were hosting a networking mixer, using her house as their free, elegant venue to project their illusion of wealth. "Oh, my word," Beatrice murmured under her breath, stopping right behind Evelyn. Evelyn didn't shout. She didn't have to. The heavy thud of her walker hitting the hardwood floor cut through the jazz music like a gunshot. A woman near the entryway turned, her smile dropping instantly. One by one, the guests noticed the elderly woman in the doorway, dressed in a loose linen set, leaning heavily on a medical walker, a stern-faced nurse flanking her. The laughter died. The conversation sputtered to a halt. Even the jazz music seemed to cower in the sudden, suffocating silence. Chloe finally turned around. The color drained from her flawless face, leaving her looking sallow and terrified. She nearly dropped her crystal glass. "Mom!" Chloe gasped, her voice shrill, cracking in the quiet room. What are you doing here? The rehab center said you wouldn't be discharged until Friday." "I discharged myself," Evelyn Sassy said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried perfectly across the room, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "And it is a good thing I did. It seems I interrupted a very important event in my house." Marcus hurried out from behind the bar, wiping his hands nervously on a cocktail napkin. Evelyn, look, we can explain. This is just a small client dinner. My firm, we needed a space with a little more gravitas than our condo." Evelyn didn't look at him. She kept her eyes locked on her daughter. "I don't know any of you," Evelyn said, addressing the room of frozen guests. Her tone was polite, the kind of terrifyingly polite tone a Southern woman uses right before she destroys you. "But this gathering is over. Please leave your drinks on the table and find your way out. Immediately." The guests didn't need to be told twice. The sheer, mortifying awkwardness of the situation sent them scrambling for their coats and purses. There were hasty, mumbled apologies as they filed past Evelyn and Beatrice, avoiding eye contact. Within 3 minutes, the house was empty, save for the family and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Chloe stood in the center of the living room, her chest heaving. As soon as the front door clicked shut behind the last guest, the panic on her face melted into furious, defensive indignation. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Chloe exploded, stepping forward. That was the regional director of a major PR firm. I have been trying to get him to a dinner for 6 months. You just humiliated me, Mom. You humiliated Marcus. You humiliated yourselves, Evelyn said, slowly inching her walker forward until she reached her favorite armchair. Beatrice expertly guided her down into the cushions, then stepped back into the hallway, giving them privacy but remaining within earshot. We are under an unbelievable amount of pressure, Mom, Chloe cried, the tears springing to her eyes with practiced ease. It was the same routine from the kitchen floor a week ago. The victimhood, the emotional manipulation. You have no idea what it takes to maintain our lifestyle, to give Nia the things she needs, to be a successful Black family in our circles. We just needed to use the house. It's sitting here empty anyway. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult? Evelyn let her rant. She sat in her chair, the pain in her hip throbbing in time with her heartbeat, and looked at the daughter she had raised. She didn't see a successful executive. She saw a parasite draped in silk. When Chloe finally stopped to catch her breath, wiping away a flawless tear, Evelyn reached into the deep pocket of her linen cardigan. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "What is that?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly losing its defensive edge. "It's the $5,000 you begged me for to save your family from financial ruin," Evelyn said smoothly. "Or rather, it's the receipt for the Tesla deposit and the Oak Creek Country Club initiation fee." The silence that fell over the room this time wasn't awkward. It was the silence of a bomb detonating in a vacuum. Chloe stared at the paper. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. He took a step back, bumping into the makeshift bar. "Nia also texted me from her babysitter's house," Evelyn continued, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. It was the voice of an auditor closing the books. "I hope the wine in Napa Valley was worth it. I hope it tasted like the blood, sweat, and cartilage of the mother you left on the kitchen floor." "Mom, wait," Chloe stammered, the fake tears vanishing entirely, replaced by genuine panic. She took a step toward the armchair. "You're confused. The medication is making you confused. We had to take that trip for networking. We are trying to build generational wealth." "Generational wealth?" Evelyn let out a short, dry laugh that held absolutely no humor. "You are stealing my twilight years to fund your vanity, Chloe. You are taking the money your father broke his back to earn, the money I scrubbed bedpans to save, and you are throwing it away on cars and country clubs so strangers will think you are important." Evelyn gripped the arms of her chair. She sat up a little straighter, ignoring the searing pain. "I am not your bank," Evelyn stated, looking directly into Chloe's eyes. "I am not your free babysitter. I am not your event venue. And I am certainly not your fool." "Evelyn, be reasonable," Marcus interjected, trying to use his deep, soothing business voice. "We can sit down and talk about this like adults. We're family." "We are done talking," Evelyn cut him off, not even turning her head to look at him. She kept her eyes on her daughter. "Tomorrow morning I am calling the bank. Every joint account, every automatic transfer, every authorized user card with your name on it is being terminated. The well is dry, Chloe. You want to be a successful, upwardly mobile family? Prove it. Pay for it yourselves." Chloe's face contorted into something ugly and venomous. The mask had completely slipped off. The loving daughter act was over. "You can't do that," Chloe hissed, her hands balling into fists. "You are punishing us for trying to survive. Nia needs that money for her tuition. You're going to punish your own granddaughter because you're having a petty tantrum?" "Do not weaponize that child against me," Evelyn warned, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal edge. "Nia is the only reason I am letting you walk out the front door instead of calling the police to report you for financial elder abuse." Chloe flinched as if she had been slapped. "Leave," Evelyn commanded. She pointed a trembling finger toward the foyer. "Take your coats, take your expensive liquor, and get out of my house. And don't come back until you remember how to be a daughter." For a long moment, nobody moved. The air was thick with unspoken rage. Then Marcus grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling her back. He knew when a hand was completely busted. "Let's go, Chloe. She's not in her right mind right now. The anesthesia is still messing with her head." Chloe let herself be pulled away, but not before shooting Evelyn a look of pure, unadulterated resentment. "You're going to regret this, Mom. You're going to die alone in this big, empty house, and nobody is going to care." The front door slammed shut so hard the picture frames in the hallway rattled. Evelyn let her head fall back against the chair. Her entire body was shaking, a violent tremor born of adrenaline, physical pain, and the crushing grief of a mother realizing her child was truly gone. Beatrice stepped quietly into the room, holding a glass of water and a white pill. "Drink, Miss Evelyn," the nurse said gently. "You did what you had to do." Evelyn swallowed the pill, closing her eyes. She had drawn the line in the sand. She thought the worst was over. She thought she had finally cut the cord. She was wrong. 4 days passed. The house returned to a quiet, predictable rhythm. Beatrice helped her with her daily physical therapy exercises. Loretta came by every afternoon with fresh soup and neighborhood gossip. Evelyn met with her attorney, Vance, via a secure Zoom call, setting the gears of her financial separation into motion. The peace was terrifyingly new, but Evelyn was beginning to breathe again. On a rainy Thursday morning, Beatrice was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Beatrice called out, wiping her hands on a towel. Evelyn sat at the small breakfast nook, a cup of black coffee warming her hands. She heard the front door open, a brief murmur of voices, and then the door closing. Beatrice walked into the kitchen, her usually stoic face drawn tight with concern. In her hand, she held a thick manila envelope. "A man just dropped this off, Miss Evelyn," Beatrice said slowly. "He said you had to be served personally, but when I told him you couldn't walk to the door, he made me sign for it. It's from the county courthouse." Evelyn frowned, carefully setting her coffee mug down. She took the envelope. It was heavy. The return address belonged to a high-powered family law firm downtown, the kind of firm that charged by the minute and didn't lose. With a strange, cold dread prickling the back of her neck, Evelyn tore the flap open. She pulled out a stack of legal documents, the thick black text blurring slightly before her eyes. She reached for her reading glasses on the table, slipped them on, and read the bold heading on the first page. In the probate court of the county petition for appointment of conservator of the person and estate in the conservatorship of Evelyn Grace Washington, proposed conservatee. Evelyn's breath hitched. She scanned the document, her eyes darting across the legalese, landing on the names of the petitioners. Petitioners, Chloe Washington Davis and Marcus Davis. She flipped to the second page, reading the summary of the petition. It felt like the floor was dropping out from underneath her. Petitioners respectfully request that the court appoint a conservator for Evelyn Grace Washington, as she has demonstrated a sudden, severe decline in cognitive function and mental capacity following a major surgical procedure. The proposed conservatee has begun exhibiting paranoid delusions, erratic behavior, and has made impulsive, irrational financial decisions that threaten her own estate and well-being. Petitioners seek emergency control of all financial accounts, real estate holdings, and medical directives to protect the conservatee from self-harm and predatory exploitation. Evelyn dropped the papers onto the table. They weren't just angry about the money. They were trying to take her freedom. They were using her surgery, her vulnerability, and the very boundaries she had set against her to paint her as a crazy, senile old woman who needed to be locked away in her own life. If a judge granted this, Chloe and Marcus would have legal control over every penny she owned, the house she lived in, and the medical care she received. They could fire Beatrice. They could put Evelyn in a cheap nursing home and sell the house to fund their country club lifestyle. It was the ultimate betrayal, a legal assassination. Beatrice stood by the sink, watching Evelyn carefully. "Ms. Evelyn, is it bad news?" Evelyn stared at the papers. The grief that had been choking her since Sunday vanished, incinerated by a sudden, brilliant flash of absolute, unyielding fury. The tears dried up. The trembling in her hands stopped. She had spent her life being the strong black woman who absorbed the blows. Now they were going to meet the woman who strikes back. Evelyn picked up her smartphone from the table. She dialed a number she now knew by heart. "Law Office of Vance and Associates," the receptionist answered. "Put Vance on," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. "Right now. Tell him Evelyn Washington is on the line, and tell him we are going to war." The mahogany walls of Arthur Vance's law office felt imposing to most, but to Evelyn, they felt like the sterile, controlled environment of an operating room. And right now, she needed a surgeon. Vance sat across his massive desk, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he scanned the petition for conservatorship. He was a man in his late 50s, sharp, meticulously dressed, and someone who had known Evelyn and Thomas for over 2 decades. As he read, his jaw clenched tighter and tighter until the muscle flickered under his skin. Evelyn sat perfectly still in the wingback chair, her aluminum walker parked neatly beside her. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her posture impossibly straight despite the gnawing ache in her hip. She had not shed a single tear since the manila envelope was handed to her. The time for weeping had expired. Vance finally dropped the heavy stack of papers onto his desk. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, letting out a heavy breath. "This is aggressive, Evelyn," Vance said, his voice grave. "It's a standard playbook for hostile takeovers of an estate, but usually we see it when the parent is in their late 80s and actually showing signs of dementia. Chloe and Marcus are claiming that the anesthesia from your hip replacement triggered a rapid, severe cognitive decline. They've attached affidavits from 2 of their friends, the ones you kicked out of the house, stating that you appeared disoriented, paranoid, and violently hostile during their visit." "I was hostile," Evelyn corrected smoothly. "I was not disoriented. They are arguing that your sudden decision to cut off their financial access and revoke their authorized user status on your cards is proof of financial paranoia and an inability to manage your own estate," Vance continued, flipping to the second page. "They're asking for an emergency temporary conservatorship to freeze your assets for your own protection until a full medical evaluation can be ordered by the court." "If they get that," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into the calm, clinical tone she used to use during code blues in the ER, "they control my bank accounts. They control the deed to the house. They could fire Beatrice, put me in a state-run facility, and liquidate everything Thomas and I built." "Yes," Vance said bluntly. He didn't sugarcoat it. He knew Evelyn better than that. "If a judge grants the temporary order, untangling it could take months. They'd drain the accounts under the guise of managing your care before we ever got to trial." Evelyn looked at the polished wood of the desk. She thought of Thomas, working overtime at the plant, his hands permanently stained with grease, just so they could pay off the mortgage 5 years early. She thought of Chloe, sitting in a vineyard in Napa, drafting legal documents to steal it all. "When an artery is severed, Arthur," Evelyn said quietly, looking up to meet the lawyer's eyes, "you don't scream at the blood. You apply a tourniquet. Tell me how we stop the bleeding." Vance smiled. It was a small, predatory smile of a lawyer who had just been given the green light to go to war. "First," Vance said, grabbing a legal pad and a gold pen, "we obliterate their medical claims. If the judge orders an evaluation, they'll try to steer you toward a court-appointed doctor they can influence. We preempt them. I want you evaluated by 3 independent board-certified neurologists and geriatric psychiatrists, top of their fields, not next week, tomorrow." "Done," Evelyn said. "Second," Vance leaned forward, "we need to secure the assets so thoroughly that even if they manage to drag this out, there is nothing left for them to touch. The money in the savings accounts can be moved to a new institution, but your biggest vulnerability is the house. As long as your name is on that deed, it is a target. It's $1 million asset sitting in a highly desirable zip code." Evelyn's breath hitched, just slightly. The house. "What are my options?" she asked, her voice tight. "We could put it into a revocable trust, but under a conservatorship battle that can still be contested," Vance explained. "If you want to absolutely, undeniably remove it from the board, you have to liquidate it. You have to sell the house, Evelyn, and you have to do it before the preliminary hearing in 20 days. The silence in the office was absolute. Sell the house where Nia took her first steps, the house where Thomas took his last breath. It was a monument to her entire adult life. But as Evelyn sat there, she realized it had also become a prison, a beautiful, sprawling prison that her daughter was using to chain her down. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook. "I have the number for a real estate investment group," Evelyn said smoothly, her face an unreadable mask. "They buy properties for cash, as is, with 10-day closings. Draw up the paperwork, Arthur. We are selling the house." The next week was a grueling, humiliating marathon, but Evelyn ran it with the stoic endurance of a seasoned soldier. Accompanied by Beatrice, she visited 3 different specialists across the city. She sat in cold, brightly lit examination rooms, stripped of her dignity, while doctors half her age asked her to draw clock faces, count backward from 100 by 7s, and remember sequences of random words. They asked her what year it was, who the president was, and what she had eaten for breakfast. It was insulting. It was degrading. But Evelyn smiled politely, answered every question with crisp, terrifying accuracy, and even corrected one young psychiatrist on his mispronunciation of a common blood pressure medication. By Friday, Vance had 3 notarized, sealed letters from 3 of the most respected medical professionals in the state. They unanimously concluded that Evelyn Grace Washington possessed pristine cognitive function, exceptional executive reasoning, and absolute mental capacity. One doctor even included a handwritten note that read, "Ms. Washington is sharper than most of my medical residents." The medical defense was airtight. Now came the financial guillotine. On Tuesday afternoon, a man named David sat in Evelyn's living room. He was a senior acquisition manager for Sterling Properties, a high-end development firm that specialized in buying large lots in affluent suburbs, tearing down the older homes, and building modern mansions. David looked around the immaculate living room, taking in the crown molding and the antique furniture. He looked at the elderly black woman sitting in her armchair, her walker beside her, and clearly assumed he was about to get a desperate bargain. "It's a beautiful property, Ms. Washington," David said, flashing a practiced, sympathetic smile. "But given the age of the roof and the outdated plumbing, the best cash offer we can make for an immediate closing is $700,000. It was a low-ball offer. The house, even needing updates, was easily worth $900. Evelyn didn't blink. She took a sip of her tea. "David," Evelyn said warmly, setting the teacup down on its saucer with a delicate clink. "I spent 35 years running a triage ward. I can spot a bleeding wound from 50 feet, and I can spot a predatory opening bid from across a coffee table. The lot size alone is worth $850 in this zip code. You are going to offer me $820,000 in cash. You will waive all inspections. We will close in exactly 8 days. And you will include a leaseback clause allowing me to remain in the property for up to 30 days post-closing while I finalize my relocation." David stared at her, his practiced smile faltering. He shifted in his seat, suddenly realizing he was not negotiating with a frightened widow. He was negotiating with a woman who had nothing left to lose and absolute clarity on what she wanted to gain. $820 is steep for a cash close, David hedged. $820, Evelyn repeated softly. Or I call the developers down the street who have been leaving flyers in my mailbox for 3 years. I have their number right here. 10 minutes later, the contract was signed. The transaction moved in absolute secrecy. There were no for sale signs planted on the front lawn. There were no open houses or real estate agents walking strangers through the bedrooms. Loretta was the only person who knew, standing by Evelyn in the kitchen, squeezing her hand as the final digital signatures were executed. Within 8 days, the funds were wired into a secure, newly established account under Vance's direct oversight. The house, the crown jewel that Chloe and Marcus were so desperately trying to seize, legally vanished into thin air. Evelyn was now just a tenant in a home she used to own. The day after the funds cleared, Evelyn returned to Vance's office. It was time for the final, permanent strike. "The cash is secure," Vance said, pulling out a thick, leather-bound folder. "Now we establish the irrevocable trust. Once this money goes in, it cannot be taken out, not even by you, without strict adherence to the terms we set today. And more importantly, it makes the money completely invisible and inaccessible to any conservatorship claim." "Good," Evelyn said. "I want Nia listed as the sole beneficiary." Vance nodded, his pen hovering over the document. "At what age does she receive access to the principal?" 25, Evelyn mandated, "and only upon completion of a 4-year college degree or as a down payment for her first primary residence. Until then, the trustee may disperse funds strictly for her educational needs, tuition, books, boarding, directly to the institutions. Not a single red cent is to pass through the hands of her parents." "Understood. And the trustee?" "A corporate fiduciary," Evelyn said, not missing a beat. "A bank, cold, calculating, and completely immune to Chloe's tears and Marcus's manipulation. If they want a dime for that child's schooling, they will have to submit an itemized invoice to a trust officer who doesn't care about their country club status." Vance smiled, furiously writing notes. "It's bulletproof, Evelyn. And the remainder of your estate? Your pensions, your personal savings?" Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a glossy brochure. She slid it across the desk. It featured a sprawling, sun-drenched luxury retirement community in Savannah, Georgia. Palm trees, single-story villas, private chefs, and a state-of-the-art physical rehabilitation center. It was 500 miles away from the cold, suffocating suburbs of her past. "I bought a villa in cash yesterday," Evelyn said quietly. "I move in 2 weeks. The remainder of my savings will ensure I am very comfortable for the rest of my life. I won't ever need to ask anyone for a glass of water, let alone a place to stay." Vance opened the brochure, looking at the pristine pictures, a deep respect settling in his eyes. "And the disinheritance clause?" he asked softly. Evelyn's posture stiffened. This was the final cut, the surgical removal of the tumor. "Write this exactly as I say it, Arthur," Evelyn commanded, her voice steady, though her heart pounded a heavy, solemn rhythm against her ribs. "I intentionally leave nothing to my daughter, Chloe Washington Davis, or her husband, Marcus Davis. They have already received their inheritance in advance, through years of financial support, loans never repaid, and the emotional toll of their entitlement. They are fully capable of providing for themselves. I release them from any obligation to me, and I release my estate from any obligation to them." Vance typed the words into his laptop, the clacking of the keys echoing like the turning of a lock on a heavy steel vault. "It's done," Vance said, closing the laptop. "The trust is funded. The house is sold. The medical evaluations are filed. When we walk into that courtroom on Thursday, they aren't going to hit a brick wall, Evelyn. They are going to step off a cliff." Over the next few days, Evelyn packed her life into neat, labeled boxes. She didn't pack the heavy antique furniture or the expensive china. She packed photographs, Thomas's old watch, her favorite quilts, and the small, hand-drawn cards Nia had made for her over the years. The rest she told the moving company to donate to a local women's shelter. Her phone buzzed constantly. Chloe, realizing that Evelyn was ignoring the legal summons, had switched tactics. The threatening lawyer letters were replaced by a barrage of frantic, manipulative text messages. "Mom, please, we don't want to go to court. Just call me. Mom, Nia is crying for you. Why are you doing this to your family? We are just worried about your health. Please let us help you. We love you." Evelyn sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun, her walker resting beside her. She read the messages on the glowing screen. A month ago, those words would have shattered her. She would have believed the "I love you." She would have blamed herself for Nia's tears. She would have called back, apologized for being a burden, and handed over the keys to her life. She looked out at the street. The leaves on the old oak trees were beginning to turn a brittle, burnt orange, preparing to fall away so the tree could survive the winter. Evelyn pressed her thumb against the screen, highlighting the entire text thread. With a single quiet tap, she hit delete. Then she opened her contacts, found Chloe's number, and pressed block. She did the same for Marcus. She set the phone down on the small wicker table. The silence that followed was not lonely. It was the sound of a woman who had finally learned how to breathe her own air. On Wednesday night, Evelyn laid out her clothes for the court hearing. It was a sharp, beautifully tailored pearl gray suit she had bought years ago, but never had the occasion to wear. She polished her black leather shoes and set her pearl earrings on the nightstand. She wasn't going to court to defend herself. She was going to court to perform an eviction, not from a house, but from her life. As she drifted off to sleep, the pain in her hip was nothing more than a dull whisper, easily ignored. For the first time in 68 years, Evelyn Washington slept without a single ounce of worry about what tomorrow would demand of her. She had already paid the bill in full. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a dull thud. Evelyn walked down the center aisle, her posture rigid, her aluminum walker moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old paper. Beside her, Arthur Vance carried a thick leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. They took their seats at the defense table. Evelyn smoothed the skirt of her pearl gray suit and placed her hands neatly in her lap. She did not look back when the courtroom doors opened again. Chloe and Marcus walked down the aisle, flanking their high-priced family attorney. Chloe was dressed in a demure, soft pink cardigan and a modest skirt, holding a crumpled tissue in her hand. She looked the picture of a heartbroken, exhausted daughter dragged to court by tragic circumstances. Marcus wore a conservative navy suit, his face set in a mask of solemn concern. Judge Abernathy, a man in his late 60s with a face like weathered stone, took the bench. He adjusted his glasses, peering down at the thick file in front of him. "I have read the petition for emergency temporary conservatorship," Judge Abernathy began, his voice a low gravel. Counsel for the petitioners, you are claiming a sudden catastrophic mental decline following a medical procedure, necessitating immediate financial intervention. Chloe's attorney stood up, buttoning his jacket. Yes, Your Honor. The petitioners are simply trying to protect Ms. Washington from herself. Since her surgery, she has exhibited severe paranoia, erratic hostility, and has made impulsive financial decisions that threaten to drain the generational estate she spent her life building. Chloe dabbed her eyes with the tissue, letting out a soft, audible sniffle. Mr. Vance, the judge said, shifting his gaze to the defense table. Does your client have a response to these allegations? Vance stood slowly. He didn't button his jacket. He didn't offer a sympathetic smile. He opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 bound folders. Your Honor, my client's only response is absolute, undeniable medical fact, Vance said smoothly. He handed copies to the bailiff to distribute. Exhibits A, B, and C. These are comprehensive neurological and psychiatric evaluations conducted within the last 72 hours by 3 independent, board-certified specialists. Their unanimous conclusion is that Ms. Washington possesses pristine cognitive function. There is 0 evidence of dementia, delirium, or paranoia. Chloe's attorney frowned, quickly flipping through the documents. Chloe's tissue paused halfway to her eye. Furthermore, Vance continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room, the petitioners claim my client is a danger to her own estate. I direct the court's attention to Exhibit D. Vance pulled out another stack of papers. This is a forensic accounting of Ms. Washington's accounts over the last 3 years, Vance stated, his tone dropping into a lethal, quiet register. It details tens of thousands of dollars transferred directly to the petitioners, most notably a $5,000 withdrawal made on the very day of Ms. Washington's medical emergency. The petitioners claimed this was to save their family from bankruptcy. We have attached the receipts proving it was used as a deposit for a luxury vehicle and a country club membership. A heavy silence descended on the courtroom. Marcus's face drained of color. He stared at the table, refusing to look up. The only financial exploitation happening here, Your Honor, was being committed by the petitioners, Vance said. When my client finally cut off their access to her funds, they filed this frivolous, malicious petition in a desperate attempt to seize control of her assets by legally declaring her incompetent. Objection! Chloe's attorney stammered, clearly blindsided by his own clients. Your Honor, the core of the estate is the $1 million family home. We request an immediate freeze on that asset before Ms. Washington can impulsively— You cannot freeze what my client no longer owns, Vance interrupted, the absolute authority in his voice cutting the opposing lawyer off. Chloe's head snapped up. Her jaw dropped. What? She whispered loudly. Vance looked directly at Chloe, then back to the judge. The property in question was sold in a cash transaction that closed 2 days ago, Your Honor. The funds from that sale have been placed into an irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of Ms. Washington's minor grandchild. The petitioners have 0 access to it, now or ever. No! Chloe shrieked, jumping to her feet, the demure daughter act shattering into a million pieces. You sold my house? You gave away my inheritance? You spiteful, crazy old bitch! Order! Judge Abernathy bellowed, slamming his gavel down so hard the sound cracked like a whip. Sit down, Mrs. Davis, or I will have the bailiff put you in holding. Marcus grabbed Chloe's arm, yanking her back into her chair. She was hyperventilating, her face red with pure, unadulterated fury. The mask was completely gone. Judge Abernathy glared down at the petitioner's table, his expression one of profound disgust. He looked at the medical records, then at the financial receipts. Finally, he looked at Evelyn, who had not moved, had not spoken, and had not broken her perfect, terrifying calm. This petition is not just without merit, it is deeply offensive to this court, Judge Abernathy said coldly. Petition denied with prejudice. And to the petitioners, if I see your names on my docket again trying to harass this woman, I will personally recommend the district attorney open an investigation into elder financial abuse. We are adjourned. The crack of the gavel finalized it. It was over. Evelyn stood up, leaning on her walker. She didn't look at Chloe, who was sobbing, real tears this time, tears of rage and loss. Evelyn simply turned and walked out of the courtroom, the rhythmic thud, click of her walker echoing down the marble hallway. At 7 o'clock that evening, a black Audi SUV tore into the driveway of Evelyn's house, stopping inches from the garage door. Chloe and Marcus practically threw themselves out of the car. She can't do this, Chloe screamed, her voice hoarse, marching up the front steps. "I will break down the damn door and make her write a check. She owes us." Chloe didn't need to break the door down. It was slightly ajar. She pushed it open, storming into the foyer, ready to scream. But the words died in her throat. The house was empty. Not just tidy, gutted. The antique console table in the hallway was gone. The Persian rugs had been rolled up and removed. In the living room, the Waterford crystal, the plush armchairs, the television, everything had vanished. The air smelled of plaster dust and industrial cleaner. 2 men in heavy work boots were in the kitchen, ripping the oak cabinets off the walls with crowbars. "Hey, what are you doing?" Marcus yelled, stepping into the dust-filled room. One of the workers paused, wiping his brow. "Demolition, buddy. Sterling Properties bought the place. We're gutting it to the studs." Chloe stumbled back, leaning against the bare wall. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as she looked around the empty, echoing shell of the house she had treated as her personal backup plan. It was really gone, all of it. On the dusty fireplace mantel, the only thing remaining in the entire living room was a small, pale pink envelope and a tiny velvet jewelry box. Chloe walked over to it, her hands trembling. She opened the velvet box first. Inside lay a delicate, solid gold chain with a tiny maple leaf charm. A sticky note was attached to the lid. For Naya, so she never forgets her roots. Chloe dropped the box and tore open the envelope. There was no long explanation inside, no angry rant, just a single sheet of heavy stock paper with Evelyn's neat, perfect cursive. "Chloe, I played the role of your safety net until it broke my bones. I am done performing. I am done waiting for you to see me as a human being instead of an ATM. The generational wealth you wanted so badly is locked away for the only person in this family who knows what love actually costs. As for me, I have retired. Do not look for me." Chloe let the paper slip from her fingers. It fluttered to the dusty hardwood floor. She stood in the empty room, the sound of crowbars tearing down the walls around her, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of what she had thrown away. 500 miles away, the evening air in Savannah, Georgia, was thick and warm, carrying the scent of jasmine and salt water. Evelyn sat on the private balcony of her new ground-floor villa. There were no stairs to climb. The walker had been replaced by a sleek black cane leaning against the railing. Her hips still ached sometimes, but it was the good kind of ache. The ache of a body healing, not a body breaking. She wore a bright yellow silk robe, her silver hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. On the small table beside her sat a tall glass of sweet iced tea with a sprig of fresh mint. Evelyn took a slow sip, looking out over the manicured courtyard toward the distant rolling Spanish moss. Her phone was inside, silent. Her bank account was entirely her own. Her time belonged to nobody but herself. She closed her eyes, letting the warm southern breeze wash over her face. For the first time in her entire life, Evelyn Grace Washington was breathing air that she didn't have to share. She smiled, a deep, quiet smile of absolute victory, and watched the sun go down on a life she had finally claimed as her own.